Welcome everyone. My name is John. I'm with ConveyUX, and it's my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Seraphina, who full disclosure I just met. But Stephanie's here to talk about UX best practices and challenges in the medical industry. Stephanie has 16 years of experience in research and design, and has led Illumina Consulting for the past 8 years, where she consults to a lot of leading firms in medical device firms in healthcare. And I think I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, John.
Sure.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. When Joe first invited me to speak, I thought, well, you know, what I do feels really different. Are you sure people would really be interested? But really, you know, the skills, the techniques, the practices that we use as user experience professionals are pretty general. And, you know, in fact, I was talking with somebody at lunch today that, you know, they were interested in moving into the medical industry. And, you know, the skills and the experiences that we have are really transferable from one industry to another. All right, so I wanted to kind of start off with something kind of provocative. And so how many of you have had an experience where either yourself or a family member, you know, was greatly benefited by the medical industry? So most everybody. I mean, even if you had antibiotics, right? Without antibiotics, you know, we would all be really, really bad off. And then how many people that you know of, you know, had an experience with the healthcare system that really resulted in something that was avoidable, and it resulted in really bad consequences? Okay, so a lot of people actually. So, you know, I think as consumers of the healthcare industry, we're actually really ignorant as to how dangerous the healthcare industry is. You know, for those of you that have had bad experiences, you're more informed and educated. But even being informed and educated, when we walk into a hospital or a doctor's office, we basically hand the keys over. You know, we didn't decide what equipment they use. We didn't write their hospital policies, and we can't research it. You know, I spent 3 hours researching what kind of, you know, milk frother I was going to buy. But, you know, I don't get to research, you know, which hospital I want to go to because they have, you know, a certain brand of a medical imaging device that I know is the best. I'm really at the mercy of these, you know, hospital systems, the healthcare system that's in place. So if you were guessing, where would you say that use error falls in from, you know, we'll say, if cancer, or let's say heart disease is the #1 leading cause of death, where do you think medical error falls? So just throw some numbers out. Fourth? Okay, and what was your guess?
Oh, you're talking about numbers or ranking?
Ranking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what ranking would you put it at?
Leading cause of death?
Yeah.
1.
Okay, so heart disease is 1, and then second would be cancer. Third is lower respiratory, so people that have COPD or pneumonia at the time of death. And then fourth would be stroke. And then fifth, so that was a very good guess, you guessed fourth. Fifth is death that results from some type of an error that somebody made in the healthcare system. And, you know, the very first time I heard this number, I just was like, really? You know, and I've gone back and I've researched it many times, and this is a number that the FDA puts out. It's not, you know, it's not in Consumer Reports or anything like that. And the other thing that's really startling to me is that this is above the number of people that die from motor vehicle accidents. So there's about 40,000 people a year that die from motor vehicle accidents, breast cancer, diabetes. And if you think about the awareness of these other types of issues that we have as a culture, and the amount of research and focus that goes into resolving and you know, reducing the number of deaths that are happening in these other areas, very, very little is being done in the healthcare industry. compared to these other places. And so I call it the invisible epidemic. Most people are pretty shocked by these numbers. And within the 98,000 a year that die from some type of medical error, about 30,000 of those are from the device industry. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So what's being done, and again, this is focusing on the medical device industry because that's my specialty. So in the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot of added pressure on the FDA that's coming from Congress. And that's really from lawyers and consumers going to Congress and, filing these class action lawsuits that were warranted and really important, and Congress kind of waking up to the negligence that's been happening in our country with the FDA. And as a result of that, the FDA's been increasing their expectations for what device manufacturers need to do to demonstrate that their products are effective and that they're also safe. The other thing that's happening is that historically, if there was a device that the FDA had already approved and your device was using the same technology and basically treating the clinical condition in the same way, you could do what was called a 510K approval. And so, whether the device that was out in the market was safe or not, it didn't matter. It only mattered that it was out there. So recently, especially for high-risk devices, the FDA is changing it, that anytime you do a new submission, you have to provide a full set of evidence demonstrating that your product's going to be safe. There's been a rapid rise in the number of standards that are out there and guidelines that we have to meet as manufacturers. And then there's an increase in the human factors and the user experience professionals that's happening right now in my industry. And if I do anything today, that's what I hope for, is just to inspire some people to look into working in our industry. We're very short in people that are really passionate about what we're doing and interested in user experience and user-driven design. And then last couple things that are happening, lawsuits are continuing to rise. If you go to YouTube and you type in medical device error, you'll get hundreds of videos by attorneys pleading for you to come and be a part of their class action lawsuit. And then the other thing that we haven't done very good as a country is reporting from the field. So other countries like Australia and other places, they do a much better job of when products are out in the field, getting very quick, rapid feedback about how it's doing, and either taking it off the market quickly or using that to inform the next generation design so that it's better. All right, so I thought, I always appreciate presentations when I feel like I get to know the presenter a little bit. It just makes it a little bit more personal and a little bit more about my background and kind of view on what I'm doing. And so I'm classically educated in human factors, and many years ago I was working in the defense industry, which is like completely opposite of what I do now. But I was pregnant with my first daughter. Her name is Cassidy, and during just the normal 20-week ultrasound, they discovered a pretty significant abnormality with her kidney. And so it was just a kind of a genetic problem. And I saw a couple of different specialists and got different diagnosis, and it wasn't really until the day that she was born when they could do an ultrasound on her and really get a good look at what was going on, that we knew what we were dealing with. And about the same time, I had a really good friend that her insurance didn't cover that 20-week ultrasound. And I talked with her and encouraged her and said, you've really got to go. And so she found an ultrasound school in her local area, and she went and volunteered to be a model, and she was able to get an ultrasound. But when my daughter was about 6 months old, she had corrective surgery on her kidney, and it was on a scale of 1 to 10, it was like a 9.5. There were 2 surgeons, and they had to remove the upper lobe of her kidney. She had 2 ureters, so they had to remove one of them, and then the good one they had to reattach to the bladder in a better place. And the surgery went really, really well. And since then, she has not had a single day of any problems. And as a young mother, when you're pregnant and you've got a child that's inside of you that's sick like that, it's frightening. And the future is very uncertain and very unclear. And so, those are pictures of Cassie. That was the day I brought her home from the hospital, and there she is. She's 16 now and a sophomore in college and just really thriving. And so I was ready to leave Florida and found out about a company north of here in Bothell that was taking ultrasound technology, and it was miniaturizing it, and it was simplifying, automating a lot of things, and putting kind of meta collections of defaults to make it easy for the user. And their goal was to get this technology out into the hands of people more at the forefront so that they could get better information earlier. And so I just thought, wow, this is, a miracle, another miracle in my life, to get to go and work for a company that I was so passionate about what they were doing. And so I was really, really underqualified, but they ended up hiring me, and I moved up here. And then about 8 years ago, I started my own company, and I've been working as a consultant and get to work on lots of different products now. And in the medical device industry, what I find, especially with small startup companies, a human factors person kind of spans the whole gamut. So we might be doing the upfront ethnographic research, as well as user interface design, ergonomic design, usability testing, and then training, and even post-market surveillance on stuff. And so I'm a generalist, and I work kind of across all phases of the product development. I even work on user guides. Anything that's going to improve the user's performance with the device, I'm all in if it's going to help them. And I work on both hardware, software, combination products that's a drug and some type of a hardware. And I do a little bit of, just for fun, I'll go and work in kind of the health, cosmetic, fitness industry, because it's kind of a good mapping with what I do. All right, so what's different in the medical device industry? So first of all, it's a really slow process. We have a lot of hoops that we have to jump through in terms of regulation, documentation. Things have to be very reliable, durable. And then really the longest gating item can be clinical trials. So I recently did a study for a company that's developing a new medication that's used with a device that's for treating COPD, so it's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And it's a nebulizer, and the nebulizer, we can get that done in about 2 years. But the medication takes about 7 years by the time they do all of the longitudinal studies. The other thing that's really different about the medical device industry is that, if you kind of think of like Maslow's hierarchy, use safety is at the bottom. And even below that, maybe we might put effectiveness of the device. They're kind of competing against each other, but it needs to be safe, it needs to be effective at treating whatever the clinical condition is. And then the next thing would be usability. And then the last thing is kind of the softer aspects of maybe more of the emotional experience or the attraction of the product that the user has to it. So it's a little bit more industrial, I think, kind of in the approach. There's a lot of pressures on designers to get it right and protect patients from harm. And we talked about this morning, and I love this because I actually had this slide already put together, but innovation in the medical industry can be really disruptive. And when I was younger, I was like all about, changing the world. And, it took actually making a few mistakes as a designer to realize that sticking with what was familiar with the user in the medical industry was a lot more powerful solution than, changing things on them. And again, the consequences and we have a lot at stake when we're working with medical users. Another thing that's really different is usually when I attend like a team meeting where I've got a program manager and a software engineer, a mechanical engineer, an industrial designer, marketing, and maybe there's a clinical person also there. They're not all users of the product. So when I work for Clarisonic, they make a facial cleansing device. Everybody at the table is using the product, and everybody has an opinion. And oftentimes, as a user experience professional, it's a lot harder in that environment to have influence and an opportunity to really you know, create empathy, just like we heard in the last presentation here in this room, because everybody is so narrowly focused on their own experience and opinions. In the medical industry, it's a little bit different. So, you know, the teams that I work with really look to me to be an expert and to be that bridge and liaison between their users and what's you know, needs to meet up with the technology and the product design. And then the other thing that's kind of a positive is that generally manufacturers are pretty invested in use safety and usability. You know, unfortunately, a lot of them, the way they get invested is that they have a submission to the FDA, and they get a big letter back with rejection on it. And oftentimes it's, you know, where was your human factors program and work? And so that's how a lot of device manufacturers are waking up and finding out that they need to be more focused on the user experience. All right. So I wanted to just kind of, I switched slides around a little bit because I wanted to just kind of dovetail into kind of the idea of innovation and just share a kind of a case study for something that I worked on. So this is Sonosite. This is the first company that I worked with that was, you know, taking ultrasound and making it really ultra mobile and portable and super easy to use. And it was so exciting to get to be a part of a team that was, you know, really wanting to be innovative. And so, you know, very typical design process that you would have for, you know, really any product, starting with ideation and then doing mock-ups and eventually ending up with a product. The idea for this product was that it would be used by primary care physicians. So when you went in for your annual checkup, you know, they might have a couple of things that they could check for. And, or if you had a complaint about something, they could take a quick look. And interestingly, this was not how this was supposed to be held. So this was kind of accidental innovation. So we had moved the battery out and the display actually popped up, and we were thinking they would hold the cylinder with the display up and part of it hanging down. So one of the design challenges is that this was over 2 pounds, which is an awful lot to put into a single hand, and especially with trying to have some range of motion for a thumb. But it ended up creating kind of more of a balanced design and had equal weight kind of on both sides. And so we ended up going with that. The bottom picture is a 95th percentile male hand. So you can see we didn't do super great there. He had to really back his fingers out in order to interact with the controls. So where does this kind of fall? And this is kind of sampling. I just threw this together really quickly after the presentation this morning with kind of the idea of innovation and best practices. And so old ultrasound systems, so the ultrasound in the lower left corner is what high-end ultrasounds look like. This was a company, ATL, that's located up in Bothell. And, you know, Sonosite broke off of ATL originally. And it was very clear that they had very different business model and business objectives. And the first product they created was the 180, which is the one that kind of looks like the pillow, the little white one next to the backpack. And it was very successful. It was really simple. And Sonosite worked with IDEO, and they kind of created this very soft, non-intimidating product. And it worked. It worked really well for these new users that, you know, went to a weekend workshop to learn how to use ultrasound. It wasn't intimidating at all, and it was really, really successful. There had been mobile ultrasound before, but Sonosite really kind of put the whole business package together with offering training and the support that was needed for adoption. Interesting note, the backpack that's there, the idea of innovation of two things coming together, and that was modeled after my daughter's diaper bag. And so she had an LL Bean diaper bag, and the back pocket had, anyway, so I can't remember if I have a patent on that, but if I did, it wouldn't hold up. All right, so the next thing that Sonosite did is they said, let's go even smaller, right? And let's put it out there for people that aren't even using the technology today, which was the iLook. That was the smaller handheld version that I showed you on the last slide. And it was failed innovation, right? It wasn't solving a real user need. It was a technology that we were trying to create a market for, but they didn't really need it. Primary care doctors do not have time to be doing an ultrasound exam. They just don't. You know, it's much more effective for them to order those kinds of things out. So Sonosite, actually being a really smart company and having good leadership, they decided that they were going to go after a different market with it. So instead of going for primary care physicians, The other box down there with the blue border, that's called Sight Right, and it's used by nurses to put IV lines in, especially IV lines that are going really deep, so they can visualize it. They're not guessing and poking a bunch of times to try to find the vessel. And so they put iLook on a stick, even though it was supposed to be handheld and it's got this little handle, and the user interface was not designed at all for operation on a stick. But the price point was right, and it was a dramatic improvement in the image quality and the size over what the Sight Right was. So it was really a best practices. And then I just went ahead and put a couple of other products out there that were really evolution of the things that were really working, and then addressing the places where things needed to be improved. All right, so I just put all these on here so you could have them in case you want to look at them someday. But the take-home message is that the medical device industry has a lot of standards and guidelines that we have to follow, and there's good reason for it. The two that are most important are an international standard that's 62366. It's an ISO standard, and it's the application of usability engineering. And then there's also a guideline document that the FDA has out. And so those are the two that I primarily pay attention to. Both of those documents really advocate for a solid usability human factors program, focusing on use safety, minimizing risk for the product. We're also responsible for making sure that anything that the user is interacting with that is a means for reducing risk with the device, I have to include that in everything that I do. So either my analysis or my testing or my design. So that means user guides, quick reference guides, product packaging, opening packaging, and making sure that things are still sterile, whatever it is that the user is going to interact with, we have to include in our program. And interestingly, the last 5 years, the FDA has been really focused on what we call validation testing. And I'm going to talk more about validation testing in a little bit, but basically it's a final study that's done with production equivalent products, and we, for the most part, do simulated use with it, where we're really hands-off, just fly on the wall, trying to do one last effort to make sure that the product is going to be safe. And we've really done everything we can to minimize the risk of it. And I think the reason that the FDA is really focused on this is that it's a tangible milestone that they can review. It's really difficult and there's only 3 human factors people at the FDA, which is startling. Again, we have 30,000 people a year that are dying from medical device error, and only 3 people that are reviewing the quality of my work. And a lot of companies that don't even have people like me that slipped by, right? So I think that validation testing has just kind of been this very tangible thing that they can ask companies to be responsible for. But I used to teach a class at the UW, and they have a biomedical engineering program, and that was really my take-home message: is that validation testing should be thought of as a process. It's not a final study at the end. It's really application of good process and user-driven design throughout. Okay, so we've got these 2 sources for process, so the documents that I mentioned before, and this is just the cover page of them. I have a couple slides in here I'm just going to zip through because I really just put them in here for you to have later on. So the international standard has higher expectations in certain areas, and then the FDA standard has higher expectations in certain areas, but there's a lot of overlap. There's differences in terminology, but really in terms of the intent, they're very similar. And so I have some tables here that really differentiate, what each one is asking for. One of the terms that is used in our industry is primary operating functions. And so those are things that are either related to safety, or they're things that are required in order to use the product so that it's effective. And so for the most part, we really want to identify what our primary operating functions are really early, and then they're going to be drivers throughout the whole process. The FDA does require that we create testable requirements and then do testing throughout the development to ensure that we're meeting them. Something else that's really interesting is worst case scenarios. So that's maybe an untrained user that is cognitively impaired and working in the dark. And so kind of combinations of risk factors, putting them together and thinking about how your product safeguards those scenarios. All right, so what I wanted to do is, let me just check the time. I wanted to walk through kind of a real medical condition and walk you through what kind of a typical program might look like. And this is going to be more heavily on the research side. So if you remember, I said that the thing that the FDA is really requiring of manufacturers right now is this big design validation study at the end. And as a consultant, I'm kind of driven by what my clients are needing, and what they're being asked for is this testing piece. So this is going to be a little bit heavier, focused on testing versus design. So just a couple of facts about diabetes. So it's definitely a global epidemic, and it's estimated that in the next 10 years that it's going to, the number of deaths from diabetes is going to rise 50%. So that comes from obesity increasing and lack of physical activity going down. And there's two different types of diabetes. So there's type 1 diabetes, which is that the pancreas has stopped making insulin. So this is generally what you see with people that have diabetes that are pretty small, they're fit usually, and it's usually earlier in their life when they get it. And then there's type 2 diabetes, which is generally people that are overweight, and they've become resistant to their own insulin that they're making. So they've become desensitized to it. So in both cases, diabetics generally have to take insulin. So they have to supplement their own insulin production with manufactured insulin. So type 2 is the most prominent, which makes sense, right? Because it's obesity and lack of physical activity. And just to share with you, diabetes is near and dear to my heart. So the top picture is my daughters and I with my dad. My dad is 82, and he has had type 1 diabetes for the last 50 years. And he actually worked for Medtronic, which is a medical device company, for 20 years. He worked in their pacemaker division. He was an engineer, and he was meticulous about managing his diabetes. He has logs and logs of how many carbs he was eating, what was his exercise level, how many units of insulin did he take, and he did a really good job of keeping his blood sugar around 100, which is where you want to have it. And then my grandfather, he also had diabetes, and he ran his blood sugar really high. And so that was really hard on all of his extremities because it affects the blood circulation. And so that's actually a picture of Cassidy. We were visiting my grandpa, my daughter, and you can see he's a double amputee there. So he started off with just a sore on his toe and then progressively to form. And then the other interesting thing about my dad is that 2 years ago he came down with Alzheimer's. So one of I think the side effects of him keeping his blood sugar so close to 100 was that he had a lot of lows. So instead of being high, he had a lot of low blood sugars, which, basically the kind of symptoms from the outside person is that they're drunk, and then if they get low enough, they actually will go unconscious and have seizures, and, it's pretty bad. And so it really affected his mind instead of his body. And so he's in assisted living now. My brother and I had him out for lunch one day about a year and a half ago. And, my dad, engineer, like so meticulous, and he went to give himself a shot, and we knew he was really having a hard time calculating how much insulin to take. But then when he went to give himself a shot, he attempted to get it to himself in his sternum. And so that was when we realized that, he really needed extra level of care, and so he's in assisted living now. But really, Alzheimer's and diabetes, probably two of the worst things that you could combine together, because he is completely dependent on other people to manage his blood sugar for him now. So, fortunately, because I'm so close to diabetes, I've been able to work on several different kind of categories of products that are for diabetics. And these are some examples of some products that are for insulin delivery. So there's insulin delivery products, there's blood sugar monitoring products, and then there's kind of this new category of products coming in that are more about just overall management, where you log your food. It will help calculate how much insulin you should take. So those are kind of up and coming. So on the left we have the electronic insulin pumps. And my dad was a Medtronic employee, and Medtronic has a pump, and so he used it for many years. And then the middle is kind of a new category for insulin delivery. I'm going to call it the insulin patch, but they've been kind of coming out in the market in the last 2 to 3 years. Insulin pen is very, very common, and then especially for type 2 diabetics. There's some conveniences that it offers, and then the last one would just be a vial and a syringe. And depending on the insurance that somebody has, that can greatly influence which of these products they're going to get placed with, as well as their level of sophistication and just clinically what their doctor is wanting for them. So what I wanted to do is just pick the insulin patch is what we're going to talk about. And these are some examples of some different ones. Those are 3 different manufacturers. And since I'm under an NDA with all these companies, I can't really give you the details of which one we're going to kind of be talking about, but we'll just talk about the general category. So I wanted to just kind of go through the flow of what the patient would be doing. So first thing that they're going to do is they're going to get a vial of insulin. And some diabetics, in fact most diabetics, well I can't say no, most, but some diabetics take more than 1 type of insulin. So they take a slow-acting insulin that lasts over a 24-hour period or 12-hour period, and then they also take a fast-acting insulin, which the process for it is that it peaks at about 2 hours and then it's complete at 4 hours. So after we get the insulin, we get our package, we open it up, and we have usually a sterile syringe that's larger than they're used to working with, because we're going to have to put most likely 200 to 300 units of insulin in this, because we're going to wear it for 3 days. And then in this case, we've peeled off the adhesive, we've put it on our body. There's usually some type of an insertion tool that comes with it that's going to place a needle into the tissue, and then it retracts the needle and it leaves a soft cannula or tube in the tissue that then the insulin can come from the device and go into the body. And in the case of all of these, a button squeeze is equal to 2 units of insulin. All right, so what I want to kind of do is walk you through, remember I said that there's defined processes that we as user experience professionals, at a minimum need to adhere to. You can always do more, but there's a minimum. So first thing we're going to do is really understand who are our users, what are their use environment, and what is their training. And, just like some of the other speakers, lots of different techniques and methods that we can use that I think most of you are aware of. So we could do home visits, we could, follow somebody around for a 24-hour period, we could do interviews, lots and lots of different things to understand these. One thing that is important to know is that one thing that's a little different in the medical device industry is that it's a given that certain devices are going to require training. And so depending on the category of the device and how developed and in place the training program is, oftentimes that's something that we can rely on, as because our whole goal is just to be realistic. And we don't want to design medical devices that have ATM-like intuitiveness if really we know that people are going to get training, and because the product is so complex, we can never make it like an ATM. And I'll give you an example of one of those kind of products in a little bit. All right, so for a product like this, we're going to have an extremely large range in our age, all kinds of different hand sizes and body types, which is important, especially if you're thinking about a product that's going to be adhered to skin. You know, especially with our type 2 diabetics that are bigger and have lots of rolls and folds, and also they've got clothes on. Visual impairments, visual and physical impairments, so we talked about accessibility this morning, and so this is definitely part of all medical devices that are used by consumers, and especially, you know, with an aging population. The other thing that I would add to that that I don't have there is that these users also have a medical condition that they're dealing with, and so oftentimes they can have a lot of emotions around that. They can feel really guilty and shameful, especially for people that are type 2 diabetics. And the other thing is that it's not just diabetes. You know, diabetes is usually accompanied by other health problems as well. So these people have a lot on their plate medically usually. Range and experience with delivery devices. So, you know, maybe we have somebody that's a pen user that's never used a syringe, but, you know, they may someday, you know, migrate over to this insulin patch and they're going to have to use a syringe for the first time. Range and activity level. The other thing that we really like to account for is thinking about distractions that people have, stress, and, you know, just all of the different competing demands that are happening around patients that are using home devices that could interfere and create use errors for them. All right, so we talked about the training already. So typically these types of users would get training by a diabetic nurse educator, but it's not always the case. And then the other thing that could happen is you could have a lag, a pretty large lag between when something was prescribed and when somebody got it home and was using it. The other thing that we want to do is, after we kind of have a sense of who's going to be using this product, we want to look at what are the current known issues with devices that are similar to this. So we can look at recalls, we can look at customer complaints, we can look at maybe our own data that we have from usability testing. Sometimes, like, you know, I'm working on a product that's a catheter that goes in the brain that has an ultrasound tip at the end of it. Well, those don't exist today. So, you know, how do I go find known issues? Well, I go to whatever is the most similar product that's out there, and then I analyze it to see if there's anything that I can learn from it that could apply to my new device. And so that's where there's a database that the FDA keeps called MOD, so Manufacturer and User Facility Device Experience. And there is tremendous underreporting in this database. So it's not very useful. If there is an entry in there for something, then we have to really pay attention to it because we know that it's happened 1,000 other times. So here's kind of just a summary of what the use problems might be for this kind of a device for the insulin patch. And really the top one is one of the most hazardous things that could happen. So a user could fill this device with the wrong kind of insulin. And that's a really challenging one because, you know, as a device designer, what can I do to prevent somebody from making that mistake, right? And then I just kind of annotated where we might find these types of issues. So early on, you know, we're going to, the design mitigations that you see up there would be requirements that we're creating for the product. And so central to all medical device processes is the task analysis. So really understanding, you know, what are the tasks that the user's going to have to do. And typically I'll iterate on this, you know, several times during the development because early on you don't know what the implementation is going to be, and so you're kind of just, you know, putting these blocks in place and kind of guessing, you know, how they're really going to be interacting with it. So they're kind of goals in the beginning. And then from that, I'll do an error analysis, so thinking about the physical interaction, the cognitive interaction, environmental influences, anything that could result in hazard or harm to the patient or a bystander. And then the work that I do on my error analysis always feeds back into the company's system risk analysis that they have, so there's good traceability. And our goal is really to identify as early as we can, what might cause somebody to make a mistake with this device that could hurt somebody, and then work really hard to put design mitigations in place. Either eliminate it completely or get it to a level where the severity isn't as bad or the probability of it happening is less. So next thing, we're going to do some design generation. So we're going to work with the industrial design team, mechanical engineers. In this case, there will be software because this was a mechanical only product. And after we have some ideas that we've generated, then we're going to start doing our usability testing. And I called it formative verification usability testing because the FDA calls it formative usability testing and the international community calls it verification testing. But in our world, it's just usability testing. And like I said, all of the different techniques that you're using today would still apply for medical devices. So you might have an expert come in that she's a diabetic nurse educator. We might just walk her through our design and our ideas and elicit her feedback on what she liked and what she had concerns about. We may have a couple of endocrinologists that are on an advisory board where we're seeking their input on the design. And if I don't have very high fidelity mock-ups, I might do a cognitive walkthrough with end users. With this kind of a product, I always do home-based studies, so I do some laboratory work with people, but then I send it home with them. And I'll have them journal, I'll do nightly phone calls with them, and then they'll come back in and we'll do some more kind of laboratory work and also talk about how it went over the time period that they were using it at home. We also do, clinical studies that we can leverage off of. Their goals are often different than what ours are as user experience professionals, but sometimes there can be a nice marriage. And then, depending on the nature of the product, we might also do some animal studies. So here's just kind of a list of things that we might find in all of our testing. And for a product like this, I would expect, and I did work for a company that was developing an insulin patch, and I did a total of 15 studies for them. So it's very extensive, and if the company's really invested in just wanting to do it right, we iterate a lot. I recently did a study for an insulin pen, and it was a validation test, and we had a sample size of 160 participants. And that's a lot because half of them get trained and half of them don't. And, it took us 2 months to do the study with a team of like 16. So, and that's kind of on the more complicated side of things. So let's just talk about validation testing. So it's the final study that's done with production equivalent. And the view on this study is not so much to look at success rate, but it's really to look at failures and difficulties and really look at the root cause for it and then determine if the manufacturer is really doing enough to mitigate and prevent that use error from happening once the device gets out in the real world. So it's a little bit different thinking. And then also subjective assessment of things is equally important. So a nurse that's been working with diabetic patients for 20 years, her subjective opinion is just as important as the performance that we see with a diabetic using a device. I'm going to skip through those really quick because I know I think we're getting close on time here. So those are just the tasks. So I wanted to jump down to the bottom. So let's say I did a validation test. I had one participant that I asked them to give 20 units of insulin, but they squeezed and counted by ones rather than twos. So if you remember, I told you this device, you squeeze the buttons and it gives 2 units of insulin. So in this case, my participant just gave himself 40 units of insulin. So they counted 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 20. So what do we do now? Device manufacturers just uncovered that, based on human nature, we count by ones. unless we're like in kindergarten and learning to count by twos, our natural tendency is to count by twos. And so, what does the device manufacturer do then? And it's pretty simple. It's a process where we get a risk management team together and we look to see, have we done enough to mitigate the risk given the clinical benefit and value of the device. So an insulin patch is very beneficial because it's got the insulin at the right time, the right place. It increases compliance with what the doctor is asking them to do. And so, it's really up to the device manufacturer to decide which way they would go. One thing they could do is they could redesign the device, they could redesign the training, they could change the instructional materials, and it's not always clear cut. All right, so I think we're at our 45 minutes. I have one more example that I could show you that's just a really complicated system that's getting a lot of light on it, and I'll just take a couple minutes just to do that, just to give you a little bit more perspective. So this is the Da Vinci robotic system, and they are one of my clients. And they're up and coming, completely different way of doing surgery from open surgery or laparoscopic. And lots of benefits, more precise, better vision. However, it removes the surgeon from the bedside, and also it really requires a lot of training. So this is one of those devices that if you have somebody that's not well trained on it, it can be very, very dangerous. And lots of lawsuits out there right now. So very complicated. It's got 4 different pieces to it. It has a patient side cart which has the instruments to it. It has a vision system that's actually generating all the optics. There's a little station where the physician sits, and it's kind of like he's playing a video game, or she. And it has little clippers that they use to control the instruments, to move them in and out and twist them. And then there's also pedals so that they can apply energy. And different types of energy, because different energy affects the tissue in different ways. And lots of accessories that go with this as well, because you use different instruments for different things. So you might use a stapler, or you might use forceps, or you might use scissors that you can apply energy to, so it's sealing as it's going. And so, when I help this company with their design and usability testing, it's really complicated. And also, they're working in teams of people, so I can tell you, like a typical study might involve 4 human factors facilitators. We may also have some observers, and we may have 3 participants that are working in the room at the same time. So really exciting. I'm glad to have an opportunity, because the Da Vinci system, I think, is getting an unfair report card right now. Because it's a big company, it's profitable, it's easy for device manufacturers to come after them. If you compare it to open surgery, where there's all kinds of mistakes and stuff that happens, who does somebody sue? The scalpel manufacturer, right? So they're an easy target. And I think lots of opportunity to really improve healthcare, because it's less invasive and better recovery times. So I will stop there. So I hope that maybe a couple of you I inspired, that you might someday consider contributing to the medical field. It's very rewarding. I've had products that I have patents on, used on my mom and other family members, and it makes every day meaningful. So lots of opportunity.